Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. The song, I'm not sure if it's playing, we got a snippet of it, but the song that we'll be playing in the background soon, I hope, is entitled That's When All Will See, and it was written by our very own NationSwell Council member, Winston Marsalis. Winston describes this song as a parade song for some future time when, quote, we won't need death and destruction to force meaningful, intelligent, and humanistic change, end quote. So this song is intended to inspire us to create the future that we want to see. We hope that today's main stage will provide additional motivation as we all consider our role in creating a more equitable future. Please take a few minutes to pop in the chat. I see some of you already have, thank you. Please take a few minutes to pop in the chat. Tell us your name, where you're calling in from, where you're joining in from. And if you can hear the song, I'm not sure, I can't hear it, but if you heard the song, what feelings it evoked in you. I'll start, I didn't pop it in the chat, but just for an example, my name is Jay. I'm from Philadelphia, that's where I'm joining in from. And this song makes me feel really hopeful and happy. So we'll begin our program in a couple of minutes. Pop in the chat, get to know one another, and we'll be with you in a second. Thank you. All right, I think we're ready to go. I hope we are. I'm going to start. Welcome every day to today's main stage event. My name is Jamye. You can call me Jay. I'm Council Director at NationSwell. For those of you who are new to NationSwell, NationSwell is a social impact ecosystem built to help purpose-driven leaders and organizations take impact to the next level. Our main stage events are the premier convening for change makers of all stripes to learn clear, actionable ways that they can be a part of solving some of the world's most pressing problems. In the short time we'll spend together today, we'll experience inspiring discussions from members of this purpose-driven community. We know that change takes action. By sharing this time together today, wherever you are, you're taking a step towards being a part of a set of solutions that power a better world. With that being said, I want to welcome you to today's main stage event, Black History, Black Future. As Black History Month concludes, today's discussion centers on how leaders like you can build a better Black future. One where Black excellence is celebrated, Black innovation is supported, Black opportunity is accelerated, and Black lives flourish and thrive. Leading this discussion today, we are thrilled to have with us some very special people. Today we have with us Chante Harris. Chante is a climate tech ecosystem builder and the co-founder of Women of Color Collective and Sustainability. We also have with us Baratunde Thurston. Baratunde is an author and host of How to Citizen and PBS America Outdoors. We are welcoming today Jamye Wooten. Jamye is founder and CEO of Collectively. And moderating our conversation today is Erin E. Evans. Erin is the senior culture editor, at HuffPost. Erin will take it from here. I will return on the back end of the hour to share questions that hopefully you've popped into the Q&A section and into the chat. We're accepting questions, from panelists and the moderators. Please feel free to post the questions throughout the event. And I will give it to Erin. Erin, take it away.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you, NationSwell, for having me talk to this panel about their work and how they imagine Black futures. Again, my name is Erin Evans. I'm a senior editor of culture at HuffPost. I'm based in Brooklyn, New York, but I am originally from Dallas, Texas. I've been a journalist for the past 15 years, and I've edited and covered everything from the movement for Black Lives all the way to covering some of my favorite TV shows like Grey's Anatomy and Insecure. But one of the projects I'm really the most proudest of that I worked on in my career is the Black Monuments Project at Mike. That project reimagined what America's landscape would look like if we honored Black heroes across the nation with statues and monuments. And then one thing I'm excited about for this conversation is that it really does align with how I personally think about Black History Month, but also how I think about it as an editor at a mainstream publication. I try to approach it by honoring and paying homage to past Black history makers, but also really thinking about people who are doing the work today, the people who are trying to ensure that, we are building strong futures for those who come up after us. And then the work being done with organizations on this panel in particular really do represent that ideal. And what's great about that is they're not just doing it for Black History Month, but they are doing it 365 days a year. So let's go ahead and get started. I would love for each of the panelists to introduce themselves with telling us who they are, who they're affiliated with, and what they're hoping to come out of our conversation today. So let's start with Baratunde.
Good day, everybody. Thanks for having me here. Baratunde Thurston. I am the son of Arnita Thurston and Arnold Robinson, and I hope to get out of this session, this gathering, relief and a bit more of that jazzy jazz music. That was really nice. It got cut off because the man didn't want us to enjoy ourselves and be free in our bodies. I work as a storyteller across a lot of media, microphones, cameras, live events, trying to help us weave together a story of who we are and who we can still be in this troubled yet still promising land of ours. And I write for Puck as a founding partner and writer. I host this PBS series, America Outdoors, which has helped me explore the human relationship with nature, one of union, not separation. And I have this podcast, How to Citizen, where we interpret citizen as a verb and see it as our roles to shape the communities that we are part of and not just outsource it to others to do so for us. Thank you again for having me. Looking forward to jamming with this great band.
Yes. And Jamye, could you go next?
Absolutely. Thank you again. Thank you, Erin. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. I'm Jamye Wooten from Baltimore, Maryland. I run an organization called Collectively. We're a place-based social change organization where our mission is to be a resource for those that seek to find, fund, and partner with Black-led social change organizations. We launched in 2019. And since we launched, we put about $1 million, over $1 million, no strings attached grants into Black-led organizations in the city. And today I sort of bring into this space with me my dad and my sister. My dad, Palmer Wooten, who owned 5 dry cleaners and several nightclubs. He had to drop out in the 10th grade to go to work. And my sister went on to law school, but owned 2 pizza delivery stores in the city, and lost my dad at 56 and my sister at 53. So while we celebrate their resilience and the hard work they've done in the community, we also know that this work can take you out. And while we're really, trying to mobilize resources and make sure Black-led organizations in particular have what they need, not just to survive, but to thrive, and honored to be here with you all today.
Thank you, Jamye. And Chante.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. I always love the NationSwell Mainstage, so it's nice to be back. Erin, thanks for moderating this discussion. I'm really excited, I think, to talk about mostly Black futures. I feel like most of the time when we talk about Black people, we tend to, look at history, which is important, but I'm so excited that so much of my work looks into the future of what's possible for our communities. And so I'm hoping to just be inspired by everyone else that's here, also those who are tuning in. And, my desire is really to also leave you all with inspiration around the incredible work that's happening where I sit at the intersection of cities, climate, and technology, and knowing that there's space for us in every industry, and all of us are working diligently to make future possibilities for our communities that may have not been present in the past. And I do want to name my family as well. I always tell folks that I come from a family of public servants. So my mom was a caretaker, my dad was a firefighter, my uncle was actually the first Black fire chief in Newark, New Jersey, and my grandmother was a nurse and a civil rights activist. So I think they all embedded very early on in my lifetime this concept of doing good and doing well through your career and not as a kind of side project. So I've always thought of my career as an opportunity to have incredible impact with and to people.
Thank you, Chante. I really love that everyone shouted out their family. And I am born and bred in Texas. My mother, my father, their mothers and fathers were rooted there. And so much of my memories as a kid is thinking about history, but also thinking about the way forward in Texas in particular, especially in the last few years as the celebration of Juneteenth has become more of a nationwide celebration and acknowledgement. And so my Texas roots are always with me forever and ever. So I did want to highlight that as well. Let's start off with a question to kind of kick off the entire panel. And Chante, I'll just start with you since you just led off. When you think of the phrase Black future, what do you envision and what kind of images come up for you?
Yeah, I love this question, and I realize I didn't say what I do, so I'll just weave that into
Sure.
this response. But yeah, when I think about Black futures, I really think about us living in a world where Black people have an ability to use our innate creativity, ingenuity, and knowledge to live the fullest potential versions of ourselves throughout our lifetime and really create whatever we want. And I think that, to me, is at the heart of a lot of the work that I try to do. I've been known throughout my career to ask questions and really push the boundary on what's possible, whether we're talking about tech, investment, or innovation, and recognizing that behind all of these industries are people. And, why can't those people be, representative of the communities that we come from and have a stake in what is being built for our future? So I think at a high level, that's how I think about Black futures. In terms of my specific work, I've been in the climate tech space for a while, and I was an operator, which just basically means I scaled different products and technologies in cities. And then I became an investor. So I've been investing in early stage climate technologies for the past 4 years. And actually alongside another woman of color, one of the first Latinas to raise millions of dollars. As a hard tech founder, we built a climate tech venture studio model, which was a $10 million initiative deploying capital into early stage climate technologies. And that included Black founders, right? So there are a number of incredible PhDs, climate scientists that are also building climate technologies and scaling those solutions. And we were really proud to see that in our first year, we had over 70% of our founders come from diverse backgrounds across, sex, race, even educational background, and also global diversity. So really looking outside of the US as well. I say that to say that when I think about Black futures, one of the things that I've been talking about for the past, say, 4 years is this concept of creative community resilience, which to me means, or really has been embedded in this belief that those who are directly and disproportionately impacted by the lack of reinvention, reimagination, and investment in cities are also the ones that are building the most innovative concepts and technologies for the future. And we can see that particularly when we look at the climate crisis and understanding that, the communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis are also the ones that are having to think through mitigation and adaptation strategies, think through innovations and technologies that can both allow them to, exist in those communities where they still are, but also think about the futures that they want within those communities. And so in that context, to me, Black future really is about how can we create cities as an epicenter for Black culture and brilliance, to be able to create a true canvas for how we think about regenerative cities, how we think about the future of where we live, where we work, how we build, what we eat. And there are Black founders at the forefront of a lot of these technologies and solutions. So yeah, I'm really excited to bring that into the conversation today, and excited to hear what the rest of the panelists have to share.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chante. We'll circle back on some of those points you made in that intro later on in this conversation. Jamie, what do you think of when you think about the phrase Black future?
Well, I think, Chante hit it very well. I think a lot around self-determination and ability for people groups, particularly Black folks where I'm in Baltimore, to have the resources that they need to make the decisions that they want to make and build the type of programs that they know. I believe that those are closest to the ground should be at the center of driving these changes. And often we know that, particularly in philanthropy, Black-led organizations only receive about 2% in the $60 billion of foundation funding. And so we launched collectively, really, one of my sayings to foundation is often this partnership, not paternalism. Like how can we partner? How can we come alongside one another? And we're really trying to shift the center of gravity where community is at the center of this work. And so we work very hard to build out a platform to make sure that we're listening to those on the ground, working hand in hand with those on the ground and making sure that they're driving the force. Part of our work is rooted in participatory grant making. So every month we have a Black Futures micro grant. Organizations submit a 2 to 3 minute video and the community at large votes. So we've had now over 110,000 people vote. So Baltimore has been very much involved. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we now have done over $1 million in no strings attached grants. And that's to be somewhat disruptive in a philanthropic space that often, has a lot of hurdles and a lot of strings attached to money. And we see the genius in community that I always say we invest in impact. Like we see the impact first, and then we can always go back and get the metrics and the data that folks need. The reality is folks on the ground are very innovative and doing amazing work in community. And so we want to make sure they have what they need, not just to survive, but to thrive and to be the leaders in this space, and then have philanthropy, have individual donors and others come alongside this Black genius and support their innovation.
That's really great, Jamie. Black genius is something I think about a lot in terms of Black futures, Black present, Black past. And so I think that that's a great phrase to think of when you think of Black futures. And Baratunde, same question for you.
I think of a dance party, really great music that the DJ doesn't cut off. I think about healing. I think, we've labored long in this land and we deserve a break. And I think, respite and healing and internal work is a part of the Black future I see. It's not celebrating future freedom fighters. Like we shouldn't have to be fighting for our freedom in the future. We should be enjoying it. And so I see a block party that rings the planet. We're eating wonderful foods that we've grown, that have nurtured and captured carbon on our behalf so we can have a collective future to enjoy together. I'm seeing some direct deposits in the form of reparations. I'm seeing massage therapy and all the therapies. I'm seeing yoga for the people and time to mourn. When I think of COVID, it's been this shock to a collective system, and we kind of burned through that real fast as a nation. I'm not talking about Black people particularly, maybe as a globe, but certainly in the United States. And that's just one recent collective trauma. And the experience of Black folk in this land has been rather traumatic. And I think we just haven't given ourselves the space to really process what it means to be systematically disconnected from family and from land and from earth and all life forms, from self-determination, as Jamie put it. And we've been very busy surviving and resisting and being resilient in the face of overwhelming bullshit. And like in the future, I don't want any of that. There's no space in my calendar for that. And so freedom is what I see in the future. The freedom to waste time, the freedom to not be Black excellent, the freedom to make mistakes and learn from them and mourn what we've lost and create something that only we can.
That's great. When I first saw this question, my answer is very similar to yours, Baratunde, where I think about Black music videos of the 90s that were so bold and innovative and colorful and
a lot of rayon, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of cheap fabrics, absolutely. But there seemed to be such a creative freedom in those moments, but just displaying those on blast for the world to see and then often imitate is something I think about a lot when I think about the future. But I want to stick with you, Baratunde, on this first question. You recently wrote a piece for Puck about the Black liberation paradox. I would love for you to explain a little bit about what that means. I do encourage everyone to read that piece on Puck. It was a great thought exercise for me and how I think about the fight for liberation. But it also, you provided a few takeaways as you dove into this idea. Could you talk a little bit about that, but also what you took away from?
Yeah, thanks for the setup. So I wrote this piece. It was something I've been thinking about for months with some focus, probably years in the background. How do we get free? And I felt like there was a trap implicit in a lot of the methods that I've inherited to think about that journey. The Carvel Wallace, who's a writer friend, named it. Oh, he's like, oh, you talking about the liberation paradox? And I was like, what you talking about, Willis? He, and he named it something along the lines of the tendency of the oppressed to focus on the oppressor in their attempt to be free. And a lot of what we have passed down to each other is, for us to be free, we got to change white people. We got to change their laws and their rules and their structures and their hearts and their minds and their implicit bias. And even in the 2020 thing, it was all like, how do we shake white people, but not too much? How do we ease them into the idea that America's still a racist ass country? And, that construct of freedom has dependency built into it. And so if my freedom is dependent on you changing, then I can never be free. Only through your largesse or your own evolution or transcendence can I transcend. And that's just, that's too small a definition. But there's also the reality that I don't think we can simply ignore the structures and the systems and the people who benefit from it and whose ancestors created it in order to escape it. It feels delusional to just be like, well, just manifest your freedom. If you just meditate on it, then the cops will leave you alone, right? If the cops bother you, then you must have invited the cops into your life. And it's like, okay, that's a little too gaslighty for me. And there are many people across the political spectrum who embrace that as, I think, a survival technique. I am unable to live in that type of delusion. I still live in the delusion where the US dollar is real. We all live in some form of delusion, but that was the box that I felt stuck in. And a way out, it turns out, I think there are many, many versions of it, but it's, to reject the binary premise, which is something that we keep learning in different areas of life, whether it's gender or the definition of life itself. We're on the spectrum of wavelengths, and that's kind of physically, quantumly cool. And that we have to find our own expressions of life in the midst of the declaration that our life matters. We have to live it too. And, we cannot be overly consumed with a narrative and an existence of struggle. It really for me, it's infectious in a bad way. And I start to just be paranoid a bit too much, or I feel fatalistic about the prospects. It's like, well, if it depends on those people, then we're doomed, So what can I control? What can I shift in my own mindset? How can I practice being free before I'm free, so I'm ready to be free when I get there? and thus accelerate bringing about that liberated state for myself. And so I took that away. I consulted the ancestors and Audre Lorde on self-care and James Baldwin on the imagination. And it's not a lot new, but I think the emphasis for me was new. There is this assumption that we are here to struggle, and we should honor that struggle. And we are here to educate others on our struggle. And this month is programmed with that in mind. And so it's a great chance to break out of that historical struggle narrative into something more futuristic and liberated, including liberating us from a story grounded solely in pain, suffering, resistance, and resilience in the face of overwhelming oppression, which is part of our story, but it ain't the whole thing. And we still have a chance to write, the one we want to live in.
For sure. What were some of your learnings specifically about self-care kind of in that journey and making sure you felt good there?
So I carry a lot in my body. I have devoted a significant chunk of my time to some racial journey and I interact with a lot of folks who are in, so we say, earlier stages of that journey. So I've kind of created this burden for myself to some degree, and it's exhausting. Yeah. And I, in the self-care part is part of this honesty and just acknowledging, I'm tired, I'm frustrated. This is, Jamie talked about losing people. Like, this work has a price, and it's not just noble to do it all the time, right. And so pausing was important. I've relearned about the value of connection to nature. It's something a TV show helped me rediscover. Now I'm just like, ooh, wind, water, birds. Like, there is so much more to our human experience than other humans. And it is really self-destructively self-centered to focus exclusively on our species. In the near term, that's what's accelerated our inability to live, sustainably and with fresh air on this earth. So it's reshuffled my, the types of relationships with life that I want to have and where I find solace and recharge. And it's from the natural world as much or increasingly as from the human world. Those are two little things that have bubbled up for me.
That's great. And Jamye, you touched a little bit on your work with Collectively at the top, but I'd love to hear more about your approach to funding Black futures and some of the initiatives that you're most proud of that are happening now and the impact that they've made on communities.
Yeah, thank you. Baratunde made me think about actually a piece I wrote years ago for Huffington Post on Black death.
Yes.
And it really was after spending some time and in Ferguson. It was here in Baltimore after the murder of Freddie Gray, with Sandra Bland. And I was thinking particularly about my daughter, who's now 20 and interning with me, but who had been from as many protests you can think about. She's been to them all. And it was this time, I think, around when Brother Castile was murdered. And she was like, Dad, is there going to be a protest? Are we going? And it's just like, man, how many more protests? How many, and just thinking about her own spirit of growing up in this moment led me to think about, its pieces beyond sort of Black death and sort of birth collectively around what is this sort of holistic way of just being in the world, not in reaction to white supremacy, racism, not in reaction to these systems and structures, but how do we begin to think about creating the world we want to create. And so, but collectively, it's really been fun. It's been fun to think in community collectively around how we might mobilize resources and give those resources back to community and have community at the forefront. I don't decide where any of this money goes. We always have an advisory board or a collective deciding where the funds go. One that I was excited about last year was a pilot program called We Got Your Back. And the We Got Your Back Award is a $2,000 a month stipend to a Black woman-led organization in Baltimore. So we assembled a panel of all Black women, business owners, They came together, viewed the video submissions, and chose this one sister. Some of the data, asset constrained and employed, was that in Baltimore, you needed $15 an hour to survive. You need about $27 an hour to be stable. So we said, like, what would it be to just able to give a sister $2,000 a month and say, you can use this money? Again, of course, thinking about my own sister as an entrepreneur and that grind, and that you could use this money any way you chose to, and that the metrics weren't, did you scale your business? But did you have joy? Did you take a vacation? Was it a certificate that you needed? Did you have to pay your mortgage? And so we're excited about sort of the unrestricted nature of all of our grant making that allows, and trusting Black folks to do what is best in this moment. In that moment, it might be pay your rent. It might be go to the spa. Like in Maryland, some of the data is 60% of nonprofits have a budget of $25,000 or less, right? 84% who have a budget above 1 million are white-led. So Black folks, for the most part, are doing this work for free. And so we want to make sure that we aren't always just investing in programs and projects, but that we're also investing in people. And so that no strings attached grant making is really about taking care of yourself. So the grants have ranged from $500 to $25,000. And of course, now that one with We Got Your Back award. Another one initiative that we launched this past summer is the We Got Your Back, We Give Black Fest, which is a 3-day weekend of just celebration of music, of panels, of discussion, and just being. And we just had so much great feedback last year. It was by the water here in Baltimore, and just to see Black folks at peace and enjoying themselves for the weekend. We also raised $225,000 over that weekend for Black-led organizations, and looking forward to, tripling in that, doubling that, quadrupling that this year. So those are some of the initiatives we're working on.
I love that. What I also love about Collectively is that it is a local, you call it a place-based organization, and it's really focusing on local communities. What was it inspired you all to keep it based in Baltimore and focusing on the communities that you have there versus going bigger?
Yeah, definitely something I wrestled with in the beginning of sort of a national, I could always create in the National Directory of Black-led organizations, but the work really was about what we call scaling deep. And it's really about building relationships and trust and the base building. And so I always said we were going to spend the first 3 years building trust. And so even though I've been in Baltimore my whole life, it was important that we build these sort of relationships so that we can do the real work. So now, like, as we're sort of in year 4, we just launched our first cohort. Now we're ready to be more intentional. But I used to say ideology is the glue that holds decentralized organizations together. Now I say relationships trump ideology, right? That if you're in relationships, that even if you say, Jamie's tripping, he's still my man, because we've been in relationships and we can work. So part of that has been, how do we give community the stamina to begin to be able to do the type of work they need to do? So for me, place-based work is the best work. I also had the opportunity, I've done sort of global work, some work in the Congo, and I had the opportunity to go to Congo in 2013. And at that time, I was doing a lot of national work, and it was being in the Congo on the ground where I said, oh, this is a whole lot different than writing letters, than signing petitions. It's a whole different ball game to be on the ground where the people are. And I said, oh, I miss this work, how I started out in Baltimore. So for me, that place-based work was take me back to Baltimore. I always tell folks and give love to folks in the community. It is hard to do work where you sleep, eat, and are trying to make a living. And so I honor particularly Black-led organizations who are on the forefront doing this work, leaning on systems and structures, and still have to feed their family.
Absolutely. Chante, let's talk a little bit more about your work in climate technology, specifically of like, where do you see the intersection of racial equity, climate justice, and technological innovation today? And like, how does your work in that on a day-to-day basis impact what you see for our future?
Yeah, thanks, Erin. I also want to just piggyback off of what Jamye and Baratunde were talking about as it relates to self-care and community care. So I didn't mention this in my intro, but I do run a global collective for women of color working in sustainability. It's called Wokesis, and it was launched out of really my own desire to see more women of color in my space. And I knew we existed, so I was never, thinking like there's no one else out there doing the work that I'm doing. It just felt like we didn't have the proper platform for not only building community. I think that piece around healing and feeling like we are not always the other, right, is so important to our mental space in this work. And I met my co-founder, who's an Afro-Latina from the Dominican Republic, and we launched in 2019. And I wanted to share that because I think in a lot of ways that community, many women of color reach out to me like, thank you so much for starting this. Thank you for building this community, creating a platform. And I realized that I really built the platform in the community that I needed, that I desired to ground me in my work. And, in the same way that I'm giving to this community, the community is also giving to me and the work every day. We, during the pandemic, launched a grant pool. So basically what we call the Collective Resiliency Fund, where we were giving kind of no strings attached financing to women of color who said, hey, either I have a project, I lost my job, I'm not able to get something off the ground that I'm working on within the climate space. And we gave out grants. We had 2 cohorts of grant recipients, and we were able to fund women of color and just give them some sort of financing that could support any area. We didn't ask a lot of questions. It was really, what are you doing? Where do you need support? How does this relate to climate or your well-being? And just seeing how many women of color were so grateful and overwhelmed by the ability to have this type of support. And I think there's something to be said about, us coming together too and doing this on behalf of our community, and really finding the funding in the midst of COVID, right? It wasn't necessarily an easy time to find non-restricted funding. So I just want to uplift what Collectively is doing, because it's so important as we see all the hoops that, whether you're on the for-profit or the not-for-profit side, we're always jumping through hoops to get the financing for the work that we're doing, or even just to sustain ourselves. And I really feel like that's a call out to folks on this panel, or attending, this panel, to really think about how do we make it easier for folks on this panel, but really, all of the community members within the Black community that are doing great work, and whether we need it for our personal endeavors and self-care or for our projects, just making that financing easier to access. That brings me to climate tech. And I love talking about climate tech. I love the work that I do every day. I think it allows me to be in a position where I'm envisioning the future with incredible people who have insights or ideas that can shift, right? Not only the way we think about technology. I think for a long time, the narrative around technology has not been one that included Black people, even though there have been Black technologists since the beginning, right, of this kind of 4th industrial revolution that we're seeing now. And so really, I see a part of this conversation around the intersection of climate tech, racial equity, and innovation as an opportunity to uplift people who have already done this. We look at the traffic light that was created by a Black man, right? A lot of the engineering and science basics of the technologies that we're using today were contributed to through Black women and Black people. And so I think shifting this narrative of, tech kind of being solely a disruptor to tech actually being something that is developed by people. It is created by people, it is deployed by people. And how do we ensure that the people that are part of that are indicative of the communities, right? Not only where they're going, but also the country and the world that we live in. So a lot of my work has been focused on getting folks to think about the value of place and place-based thinking within climate technology. So another shout out to Collectively. I love what you all are doing, and really, challenging this notion that technology and business cannot also be for the good of the communities where they're being deployed. And we're seeing that already. I mean, we are seeing incredible, mostly Black founders, to be honest, think through business model innovations where they're not only building the technology, they're financing it themselves. They're thinking about ways to make it easier for financing the transition alongside community members. And, they need funding. And so my main focus over the past few years has been whether it's launching a venture studio model or focused on raising my first climate tech VC fund in my former role, or even giving the grants through Women of Color Collective and Sustainability during COVID to get money in the hands of the innovators, right, that look like us. And the reality is that we are not going to be successful in the energy transition if we do not uplift and include Black communities in that process. I forget the name of the documentary that came out, but I went to see the screening of it recently that talked about Clotilda, right? The finding of the last slave ship to touch the States. And I was so overwhelmed, but also inspired by the conversation around environmental justice, right? And the reality is that we are moving into a transition of how we actually utilize natural resources to power all industries and all of our economy. And with that, we can't forget the damage that has been done, right? And, not only from an impact perspective, when we talk about things like higher cancer rates or higher asthma rates in certain communities, but then if you're thinking about how this is going to work through distributed networks and projects, many of these technologies and projects have to go into the same communities that have been harmed historically. And so what does that mean for how we properly engage and deploy those solutions? It can't be this disruption model that Silicon Valley has, kind of used throughout its time of really being at the helm of creating, technology unicorns and startups that are now a big part of our business community and really, the global corporations that are employing people. It has to be one that values people and place and education in its process. And I'm really, really excited to say that, when I started doing this work several years ago, I was oftentimes the only person in the room talking about technology from this perspective, but not anymore. There's a carbon tech company that just hired their first head of environmental justice. And he's not only building risk assessments and quantifying the cost of not deploying projects in a way that engage community, but we're also equipping founders, because I think there's this notion that so many founders don't care about community, or they just want to disrupt and apologize later. But the founders that I work with, whether they're Black, white, Latinx, they all really do care about how they deploy these solutions. The people who don't care are actually, I feel, the funders and the investors that don't equip them with the knowledge on how to do that well. And so I'm hopeful that through this work, not only are we seeing more Black founders at the helm of the innovation, we're seeing Black people valued in the deployment of those solutions. And we're also creating frameworks, right, for community and place to be valued throughout the supply chain of technologies that are at the helm of how we're going to live in the future. I think we all know that climate change is real right now. It's happening. And so in order for us to transition, in order for us to ensure that people have access to these solutions, these technologies, we not only have to finance them, we have to deploy them in a way that brings people together and values people in a way that we haven't seen before, particularly as it relates to infrastructure. So I'm excited. There's a lot of funding coming online. And my hope is that we see new models pop up that say, hey, you can build technology in and with community into projects that make everyone's lives better. And I think we miss the mark if we're not including and ensuring that Black people are not only at the table, but driving the discussion. So yeah, it's a lot of what I spend my time doing and thinking about. And I think it's such an exciting moment for the space and really what's possible for the future.
That's really great. Thank you so much, Chante. Before we wrap, I did want to throw one more question to each of the panelists. I mean, we've talked a lot about community work. We've talked a little bit about self-care. We've talked a little bit about what we see as future, what we see as a Black future that we would want to live in and have our kids live in and our, families thrive in. But I would love to see if everyone had one organization or person who they would like to plug outside of their own, who they see as doing that work now. And I'll start in thinking locally. I think a lot about the organization Capital B, which is a local Black-led media organization that has a national newsroom, but is also focusing out on building newsrooms within local communities. They have one in Atlanta right now and another in, they just launched one in Gary, Indiana, really focusing on issues that pertain to Black communities in those places. So I wanted to start with them. Jamie, do you have someone else you'd like to plug?
Absolutely. I love to plug the Black Church Food Security Network. This is the work of Heba Brown. It actually began after the murder of Freddie Gray. We were trying to connect farmers and churches and food to community, and since then has grown from North Carolina to the Midwest, connecting Black farmers to Black churches, and really trying to, again, all around self-determination and how do we use these existing assets and support Black farmers and control our own land. And so definitely want to uplift the work of Heba Brown, the Black Church Food Security Network.
That's
Amazing.
dope. I'll highlight a person in a group. Person is Adrienne Marie Brown, lowercase ADRIE. Most of y'all would know of her work. I just find that her journey and evolution is super exciting to me. Hardcore on the ground activism, also fiction and creative writing, like art, poetry, music, full expression of a Black experience and a journey that I really look up to. And then the group is called Color the Water. I think they're really just LA based at this point, but there are groups like them. And this is the group of folks, Black surfers, BIPOC surfers, more broadly, reclaiming waves in our connection to the earth and the oceans. And it's something that we have in this country, sometimes complicated history with the outdoors. It's like the scene of the crime for many of us. We don't want to get ashy, hair, all kind of stuff, Chante, I want to give you some credit. So woke sis, I see how you spell it. It's like, it's encrypted. So it will pass the content filters of the regime down in Florida. So good on you. And when we drive into that future, not just be passengers, it's going to be in a pink Cadillac, blasting Tina Turner, but it's EV. It's an EV Cadillac with at least 500 miles of range.
I love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And wow, I'm just, I don't know, so grateful for this discussion today.
Me too.
I want to shout out, thank you. I want to shout out Green Tech Noir, founded by a good friend of mine, Neka, and she basically had built a community of Black founders, investors, city planners, folks who are really looking at the future of cities and clean energy. And the Slack community is amazing and super fun. We also share deals. It's a way to think about kind of a holistic approach to technology deployment amongst Black people. So I think what they're doing is absolutely incredible. I also want to shout out two founders who are part of that community, Yvette and Camille. They were actually climate activists before they started their tech venture. So just a reminder that there is no traditional archetype of who can be successful within technology or climate tech. They just raised their, I think, $17.5 million Series A. And they are building a company that not only uses data and software to tell you what infrastructure isn't currently functioning for EV charging, but then they're training and hiring people and giving them full-time jobs to fix that infrastructure. And so when we talk about technology, it can be done in a way that thinks about people, it can be done in a way that thinks about upward economic mobility. And I absolutely adore what they're doing and what their story means for our space. And they also launched in all their free time, an event last year called Culture and Climate that brings together Black folks who want to either are investing or want to invest in climate tech and helps them understand the space and how do you diligence these deals? What does it look like to cut your first check as an angel investor? And it's just super important work. So yeah, those are two orgs and groups that I'm always really inspired by.
Thank you all so much. I'll throw it back to Jay. She's here.
All right, I am here.
Hi.
Hello. We have a couple of questions. We have about 6 more minutes in the session. I have a couple of questions that were put in the chat. So just going to throw them out there. The first question is for you, Erin. What's a recent story you've written or edited that touches on some of the themes this panel talked about today?
That's a great question. Well, one of the projects that we launched last week, this is our 4th year doing this list. It's called Culture Shifters. And what it does is focuses on people largely from marginalized communities who are doing the work in their industries to shift the culture of what is happening in their industry, whether that's TV and film, whether that's in fashion, in media. The link that was just posted was up from our list from a couple of years ago, but one of the people I interviewed this year was Polly Arungu, who is a photographer. And in 2020, amid, after the murder of George Floyd, and there were a lot of media conversations about diversifying newsrooms. And she, as a photographer, was often looking for community among other Black women photographers. And she had started this Twitter list that has now become a huge nonprofit organization that supports the hiring of Black women photographers. That's the name of the organization. Making sure they get hired, making sure that their work is being seen, not only by other editors, but people who just want to see Black life on screen, in a newspaper article, wherever. And so that work is really inspiring. And I know that people like her and people who we include on the Culture Shifters list are often people who are really imagining what a better future for us looks like. It may not be some huge monumental moment, and they may not be someone that you already know, but they are people who are doing work that's really impacting people's lives for the better. And yes, that's Polly and her organization, Black Women Photographers, in the chat.
That's awesome. Thank you. Next question is for Jamye. Is there any work that's coming up soon that people can come to and actually see,
Yeah, well, definitely working on We Give Black Fest. That's August. August is Black Philanthropy Month. Black August, Black Business Month. All the things will be taking place in August, so please come be a part of that. Also, we just Open Society Baltimore just closed its doors here after being here for 25 years. They made an investment into collectively of $6 million, which helps launch our $100 million statewide campaign. So the Maryland Black Futures Fund will be funding Black-led organizations, helping build and strengthen the infrastructure of Black-led organizations across the state. So we'll be doing some convening, some design sessions. So just stay close to Collectively, follow us on social media, and we'll have updates about events.
Awesome. Thank you. Somebody pop that in the chat so we can all have a link to Collectively. And then this question is for Chante. Who do you look who do you look to for inspiration? Is it a leader, a fellow leader, a book, someone, from your personal life? How do you get inspired?
Oh, I love that question. I have 3 sisters, so I either tell you this when I first meet you, or you know me for years and you don't know this. But I actually have a twin sister who's in medical school right now. And we talk a lot about the overlap of public health and the climate work that I'm doing. She inspires me all the time. I mean, being a Black woman in the medical system, we don't have to get into that, save that for another panel, but she is, one of my biggest inspirations. I have 2 other sisters who are also twins. So there's just a gang of 4 of us out here trying to change the world. They inspire me deeply. And I come from a strong family of matriarchs. So my grandmother, who I mentioned earlier, I draw inspiration from her, not only because of the work she's done, but I mean, her boldness, her courage, her bravery. People have, for whatever reason, felt the need to ask me why I'm so confident. And the reason is her and so many of the women in my life. And then I think, quite frankly, all of the other Black women in the climate tech space. So I named a few already, but NECA, who's at Aligned Climate Capital, another friend, Vita, who's at Energy Impact Partners, Amy Dufour, who's at Prime Coalition. We are in this space and also elevating not only, I think, Black founded companies, but the way that we can talk about deployment and the development of these solutions. So yeah, those are just a few, but yeah, so many people inspire me on a day-to-day. I always tell folks that my work has been embedded in the belief that nothing I do would be possible without the community around me. So I feel like I'm constantly drawing inspiration from those who I have the pleasure of meeting.
Beautiful. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I'm so sad I can't get to all of these other questions. So I'm going to pose one question to the group as kind of our closeout. If there was one insight, one tool, one strategy or resource that you would want the audience to take with them after this panel, what would that be? Everybody's thinking really hard. Erin, you look like you have an answer.
I can start. I was gonna say I'll start. I think one strategy for me has been to say no when you don't want to. A lot of times we get pressure to do things either in our jobs and our personal lives that we think for a second, this doesn't align with my own beliefs, or it just doesn't, I don't have time to do it because I want to take a nap today. And whatever those reasons may be, I think people should hang on to them and remember that you can say no, and that can be the end of it. It can be no and period, and without an excuse or a reason.
I love that. I need to learn how to do that better. Anyone else have any closing thoughts for us today?
I'll jump in. Also, Erin, thank you for sharing that. I needed to hear that as well. Oh no, of course I'm blanking. One takeaway, right? Was that the question?
Yeah, one tool, resource, strategy.
Oh,
that
I
you would want
remember.
people to
Okay.
leave to.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest gifts that I consistently give myself is the opportunity to talk to people who do totally different things from me on a day-to-day. And if you followed my work, you probably have heard me talk about silos. Like, I just think silos are are one of the biggest challenges to having real impact in this world. And so I'm the person that will go to a climate event and then sit next to the arts person and hear about all of the work that they've done. I think we can really benefit from being challenged or asked to think outside of our own box. And so I would just ask people to spend more time with folks who may not always seem like they have relevant work to what you're doing, but can potentially, shift or change something in terms of how you're thinking about your space.
Awesome. Jamye or Baratunde, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll just piggyback on Chante. For me, it was going to be relationships. Just taking your time to really center relationships. I think often some of this work can be sort of transactional and extractive, but to really bring your whole self and spend time developing meaningful relationships that I think when opportunities will come in the future.
Awesome. Baratunde, you're on mute.
Of course I am, because I've never used Zoom before. It's my very first time. So I was just heaping praise on what everybody already said, verbally retweeting them. And because we can't use real Twitter anymore because Elon broke it. So I would just, there's something that is a theme that I think we've not said explicitly, but it's coming up in a lot of areas of my life, including the recent podcast launch about fractals and basically, the patterns that we see at the large scale, also we see at the small scale. Broccoli in our lungs and a forest all kind of look the same. And the world the future that we want to inhabit, we can start creating it, for ourselves right now. And I feel like everybody here is doing that. Like you're planting that future seed now and watering it with your organizations and your work and your life. So I appreciate it, all. And I do feel the relief that I saw at the beginning, like promise. Yes. I would just also add AI is here. Look, where did my hand go? Where did my hand go? Watch out. Watch out. They're already here. They're already here.
Oh, thank you so much, everybody, for coming to join us today. I want to thank the panelists, of course, for taking the time and sharing your knowledge and your resources. I want to thank the attendees for coming. I want to thank my NationSwell staff for, for us all coming together and putting this on. If things have been dropped in the chat, links have been dropped in the chat, please follow up with those links. If any attendees have any questions that they weren't able to ask the panelists, please send them to someone at NationSwell. We will make sure that the panelists get your question and you get your answer. Thank you so much for joining us.